Good morning. My name is Dalton Mills, and I'm a first-year student here at Colorado Law. I have the pleasure of introducing our panel on developments in AI autonomous software agents. Our panel today is moderated by Professor Harry Surden. And the members of the panel are Nathan Schneider, Lucas Thelosen, and Elana Zeide. Nathan Schneider is an assistant professor in media studies here at the University of Colorado. He's currently working on exploration of models for democratic ownership and governance for online programs and protocols. Lucas Thelosen was previously the head of products at Google for Data and AI Cloud. He's now the CEO of Gravity Foundation, an AI-powered data analyst. Finally, we have Elana Zeide, who is currently an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska College of Law. And she recently published The Silicon Ceiling, How Artificial Intelligence Constructs an Invisible Barrier to Opportunity. This analyzes how AI-driven assessments and hiring tools perpetuate bias and limit opportunity. Please join me in welcoming this exceptional panel.
Thank you so much for that excellent introduction, Dalton. Really appreciate it. So we have a really terrific panel here of experts, and we're gonna dive into our first topic, what has happened recently with autonomous AI agents. We're gonna be doing a little bit of background setting, and I'll throw the first question, kind of series of questions out to the panel. First of all, what do we mean when we say autonomous agent? I talked about it a little bit. Is there a difference between autonomous system, AI, agent? So that's one idea, sort of, are there meaningful distinctions between them? And then also, what are some of the most significant real-world advances that we've seen in AI agents? Anybody want to take a first crack at it?
Yeah. I can start. Actually, if you don't mind, I want to take a brief step back because someone had the question, why does ChatGPT not remember, that I asked it? So I want to really briefly talk about training and learning and how these systems work, right? We're quite adamant actually in the technology space that we don't really train AI on your data, right? And so that's an important part as you use some of the systems that they're not necessarily trained on your data. Now, you want to read the fine print because some of them are, but a training run is only done every once in a while, right? A training run, and a training run costs millions of dollars usually. So when you type in that, not make it, even if you consented to your data being used for training, it won't make it into a training run until way later. There are other things you can do in AI to actually have the AI customized to your needs. And that's when we get to agents. So in agents, and if you're paying for the, I'm not representing OpenAI, I can't talk about the features, but if you're paying for it, you have the option to select preferences where you say, don't ask me follow-up questions. And it's actually being parsed into your question every time for you. You won't see it, but on the background, that's what the system does. So the agent does not remember, the AI does not remember, it wasn't trained, and it is not being part of the training data, but every time you ask the question, it is added back in to the prompt that you put in. So I want to be very clear. I think there's an important distinction between when is your data being used for training versus adding information to the prompt to do a better job with it. So just really quickly.
No, that's very helpful.
Yeah, I'm dealing with a lot of legal contracts, and all the time it's like, are you training our data? And so I want to just take a moment to clarify the distinction there. So I work on our company, we have a system of AI agents. So that's quite sophisticated. So I'm going to go through the whole evolution of AI in essence there. When you talk to most systems now, it is probably an agent, meaning there is some wrapper around it. There's some background information that's being passed into in addition to the LLM that you're talking to. And many times there's a component of autonomy in there as well. Meaning it can do something without asking you again. Like it has the opportunity to make a judgment call on some things. When we talk about intelligence, I want to be careful too, because intelligence can only mean something in the space of AI if there was enough data to train it on. So legal contracts, there's lots of them available, easy to train on. If I were to tell, GPT-5 to pick up milk from the grocery store, it would not be able to do that. And it will be a long way until it can do that, because nobody has documented the 250 steps you need to take to pick up milk at the grocery store. So it's very easy to train AI on things that are well documented, but I would caution to confuse that with intelligence, right? Like there's a difference there, and I think as we think about what it means to be human, and confusing it, I don't know. I think it's good to think about the lines a little bit. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to reflect a couple of the themes you raised. So one theme, which is really important, there is this belief, like common belief, that when you enter data into ChatGPT, immediately it gets sucked up by the system and becomes part of the system. So if you type in your social security number, there's this belief, oh, it reads it and now anyone else can see your social security number. But what you're saying, that's not the case, because it is the data it's been trained on has happened months before, and it's not immediately added to the model. That said, it's important to know for some of these open weight models out there, when you type things into kind of an open source model, it may become a part of some future training data set out there. A lot of these companies try very hard to scrub personally identifiable information. There are now AIs that can look at training sets and say, oh, this is a social security number, this is somebody's address, let's nix this, but they're not perfect. So just be aware of that. Another thing I heard you say, which is really interesting, these systems have evolved into kind of composite or multi-component systems, rather than in the early days, you were interacting directly with a large language model and it was immediately producing the next word or token. Now, a lot of what's happening is you have these systems that kind of intercept your query and kind of do things on the back end before producing information, adding context, adding information, and that's part of the agentic process. Yeah, great.
I think it's important to just name where the agency and where the autonomy is and where it isn't, right? Because often these kinds of terms are sold to us because a certain kind of thing is being emphasized, right? I mean, when we talk about agentic systems, these are systems that are able to operate across processes without a lot of intervention, without points of intervention that the user might otherwise expect to have. And autonomy kind of has kind of similar meanings in this context. It's very much about the user experience that we're talking about. But I think it's also important, especially in a legal context, to talk about aspects in which agency is not just residing in these systems, but is still very much residing in other kinds of places. I mean, for instance, these systems are not autonomous from public infrastructures of water, of energy, and even climate. They're not autonomous from the processes by which those data sets are generated. They are dependent on the legal and perhaps illegal or illegal processes by which data sets are generated that were used for their training. They're not autonomous from the system of finance and venture capital that provides the capacity to do this kind of training and has its own incentive structures built in. They are not autonomous from the corporate control of the processes of fine-tuning and alignment, which are the processes by which the trained models are tweaked and prepared for public deployment. And also they're not autonomous in a kind of temporal sense from the future business models and future ownership and entanglements that they may have. We are still figuring out what the business models of these systems are. We're still figuring out what they might be used for. And so I think it's really important when we talk about autonomy and agency to also have in mind entanglement. where are the entanglements, even when we point to some aspects in which these systems are performing with autonomy and with apparent agency?
No, that is a great point. So, of course, autonomous and agent is a very loaded word. And we have those words in law, which have their own distinct meaning, let alone in society. So and there's a narrative that these are just systems on their own doing their own thing, when in fact they're part of a larger socio-technological system that sometimes gets abstracted away, and it's important to remember that. It's a really important point. Elana?
So I have something that's perhaps between the maybe more concrete. So how I tend to think of it is, the AI is the process that's running that makes decisions, that parses language, sometimes output things, but the agents can interact with other aspects of other aspects of the universe, by which I mean the web, basically. They can schedule something, they can fill out a form, those sorts of things. So that's how I differentiate between it. I see it almost as like as components that can execute.
Okay, so I like that. This is sort of emphasizing the interactivity aspect of agents versus some AI systems are less interactive with the world around. I think those are all very good definitions. Following up with that, where are we seeing some really interesting movement out there in the world on AI systems, and where are we also autonomous agents, and where are we seeing limitations? And I want to, I very much like your point, Lucas, about the idea that where there's training data, you're likely to see these systems be able to simulate or replicate it. But there's a whole lot of stuff out there where there's not data, so they're likely to fall short in those areas. And it's kind of a profound realization that these things seem so smart just because a lot of the stuff we need on a day-to-day basis are kind of basic and simple, and lots of other people have provided data for that before.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, so the system we built consists of 32 AIs working together. So again, it's actually an interesting example to talk about how we have autonomy in there. And it's really funny like when you watch them work with each other and talk to each other, it's in language, right? So we can actually see it and we can read it. And sometimes they fall short on very silly things. Like where it's like, come on, guys. And sometimes it's like, wow, this was substantial. This was like, would have taken me 80 hours to actually work on, and you figured it out. So having these, like, where is it really amazing us and where is it falling short?
Can you recount the board meeting anecdote? I found that really amusing.
Yeah, so our agent system analyzes data about your company, right? You buy it and you say, okay, tell me what's interesting, what's happening, what should I pay attention to as a leader in my organization? So in order to do this, we give it access to your data. It looks through it every day, all the time. And different agents play different roles. And what we have found is that they're really good if they have a specific role to play. So I'm not so worried right now about general intelligence, where they can do everything, because actually when you give them a bunch of things to do, they get confused. But if they're really focused, they're good at it. So in our system, we have one agent that is very excited. So this agent has the role of like, come up with new hypotheses to test and things that could be interesting. Another agent is responsible for questioning everything and constantly asking, how did you come up with this? Walk me through the steps. Let's double check the numbers again, right? So a QA agent. And in the early days of our system, we didn't have a manager. Now, so it was a flat hierarchy structure, and everybody had the same say, and they discussed topics. And so the excited agent was like, this would be great for the board meeting. And all the agents went off about the board meeting, and they spent a couple cycles, which is only a few minutes, but still, a couple cycles thinking about the board meeting and how to make this great for it. And we were like, there is no board meeting. This is not, like you got completely sidetracked, completely lost focus. And so we put a manager in place. So this manager's only job is to make sure that the tasks that are being executed are still aligned with the core tasks that we put in.
Yeah, I love that because it, shows how things could go awry. The autonomous AI agents are spreading rumors, and they pick up the rumors and encapsulate it. Yeah. It's a great story. Nathan, did you have something to add about some of the
I
limitations?
think it's an interesting reminder. I mean, just hearing you describe the way in which you're orchestrating these systems, and I wonder if this will change, but how much it just actually resembles like the reinventing of wheels. You know, I mean, I've spent the last 10 years, for instance, like studying the cryptocurrency world, and a lot of them, those communities like started out with flat systems and we're like, we can reinvent everything. And then they're like, oh no, actually we need to have a manager to make sure we stay aligned, you know? And I think it goes back again to this reminder that in one sense we are experiencing something very new in the world. And on the other hand, we are also re-encountering something that's quite familiar. I mean, the stock market is a kind of AI, you know. Corporations are a kind of autonomous AI. You know, they use us as their agents, and we perform tasks toward their ends. And so it's a reminder, I think, that you know, things that we have learned in other kinds of domains may be more applicable here than maybe we think, because flashy new technology appears.
I love that. And ever more important are the social sciences and the humanities, and not just the engineering as we grapple with these issues. Elana.
So what I'm seeing a lot of is agents that do very, very specific things, and also things that are fairly menial, right? So when I say execute, it's like schedule a meeting. Well, we all have seen the scheduling platform, you know, the scheduling platforms where you just choose one and you click a button. I mean, clicking a button, to me, that is not mind-blowing, right? Which is good, because they're also not super high-stakes decisions. So I think that, and I've seen sort of that low level, and I've seen things where they're automating essentially the execution of a decision. So I do a lot of work in education and hiring, and I've seen things where they'll have advising and then, or evaluating students or admissions, and they'll automatically go to the next level without a human in the loop. So that to me is really interesting. It's interesting in two ways, both as a positive as a negative. I think on one hand, there's been a lot of talk about having humans in the loop, and so to review decisions. But when that happens, often humans are shown to be deferential to artificial intelligence. And as they do it over and over, it becomes like how we all are when we click the terms of service. You're just like, yes, yes, yes. And so in some ways, I think the sort of use of agents in this way highlights the way in which it is still quasi-automated. There really isn't a human in the loop in most circumstances, because it's not as efficient or they're not really exercising meaningful review of the opaque AI. So, but I'm seeing it in that. And I do think sort of at that lowish level, you know, if an AI misschedules you, you can figure it out pretty quick. You can fix it.
Did you want to follow up?
Yeah, no, I think that is a really, like you both actually brought up really great points on something that fundamentally was always there and actually becomes once again very important. I was invited to speak to the board of educators in Denver for the school system, not the universities. And they asked, like, what skills are the most important going forward into the future? And I think you know, things that we focused on in 1910, right, 1920, like just very fundamental. Can you pay attention? Can you logically walk through this and see the flaws in what you see here, right? And so I think that is actually really what you need. You know, you need to be able to pay attention and actually parse what this all means. And so I think in order to do that with these large quantities of quite sophisticated text, you need to be really on top of your game. You need to make sure you haven't done this for hours at end. But I think that would be a very, very important skill. And you know, I have kids, so I'm a little worried about their ability to pay attention for a long time in the future. But I think that will be, once again, not a skill that is brand new, right? It has been around for ages, and it will be, once again, very important. So in the end of the day, for our tool, for example, data analysis, our customers will be managers of AI data analysts. And as a manager, you have the responsibility to review things and be smart about it and pay attention to it and not just rubber stamp things.
Yeah, I think this is a great point about the value of human skills and human critical thinking become ever more important. So there's one story which I think is overblown, where Sam Altman says that deep research, which I showed you from OpenAI, does some 5% of all human valuable labor, which may or may not be true, but I'm skeptical of. But that said, so deep research can go out. It'll give you a very thorough, pretty accurate 20-page report. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do with that information?
Feed it into an AI.
Right, exactly. Do you have, if you have 100 reports, 1,000 reports, fundamentally, same thing with your AI data, it's very good, but at the end of the day, some manager has to have the mental capacity and the ability to understand and know what to do in the real world with that data. And if you haven't been educated sufficiently, then the AI is not all that useful.
I mean, the question of agency applies as much to the machines as it does to us. What kind of agency do we actually want, and do we actually hope to have in these systems? And again, I think that's an interesting question from a personal perspective, from a question about, or from the perspective of what kind of people are we cultivating, or in ourselves. I'm working on an essay right now about the practice of question asking in relationship to this. Like, how do we cultivate our own curiosity in relationship to these machines that seem kind of boundless in their possibilities, and seem in some ways to be effacing our areas of agency, not just labor, but areas of agency that we are used to humans having. But also, I just want to again point to those other areas of entanglement of these systems. And I think the question, for instance, of corporate agency, who is responsible for, and to whom are these companies accountable in their operations and their stewardship of these systems? And on the one hand, I think we've seen a lot of really interesting experimentation in this. I mean, the OpenAI nonprofit governance fiasco was an expression of the fact that this company was set up by people who thought, we need to do this stuff differently because the standard tech corporate model is not right for this, is dangerous for this technology. I mean, you gotta recognize that impulse, right? That's a very powerful impulse that they set. Sam Altman, whose job it was to create cookie cutter startups, decided to create a non-cookie cutter startup in the context of OpenAI. And then also, for instance, Anthropic has set up as a public benefit corporation. There's an interesting opportunity that these companies are pointing out that we don't know how to set this thing up right. One thing I've been studying is the way in which legacy unions in Europe, for instance, and legacy agricultural cooperatives, which is the most powerful cooperative sector in the United States, are applying AI differently. And I think that's a really important question. What other kinds of corporate structures could we imagine? What kinds of other stewards, maybe not corporate structure, maybe it's something else, maybe it's public AI. I think we need to be asking really intentionally now how we are leveraging our agency as a society, as individuals, as groups of individuals, as collectivities, as communities, in relationship to these systems. I mean, it was striking in thinking about your tools, where on the one hand, you're building these agents on one level, but on the other hand, they're all they're attached to the APIs of a few big companies, right? So even in that context, when building these agents, there is a profound dependency on highly, highly centralized forms of power.
Well, in some way, yes. In some ways, our system is built to change it out, any of them at any moment, right? So we were able to completely swap in an open source one. And so when I think about the evaluations that some of these LLMs, companies are asking for and are thinking about, right? I'm not so sure if that's true, because it's so quickly replaceable by something else.
Yeah, becoming a commodity.
Exactly, and they're all trained on similar data sets, right? So it's I don't know if they hold all that much power over us. If OpenAI was to say hey, you can't use our API anymore, we would not have a problem at all.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Robert, yeah.
Elana, did you want to say something?
So it's slightly orthogonal, but agency, right? So one thing I think is interesting is the idea of agency in terms of how much we want to exercise it, people retain their own, but I worry that in some ways, people will have not a huge amount of choice in terms of agency about whether or not to use AI, what to use it for, in part because of competitive pressure or perceived competitive pressure. I have talked to some colleagues of mine who are like, is everyone writing their articles with AI and I'm not? Tell me how to do that. And I don't think it's happening yet, but if so, he's the one that's doing it. No,
Yeah.
but it's.
Mine aren't good enough to be written by AI.
And, but no, it's like, if the students in my class, they know some of their colleagues, their classmates are using things and they think, oh, I better use that. If not, they're saving 10 hours and I'm not, But the truth is that in many cases, some people will get advantages from it. And I think those advantages are not going to be equally distributed, right? So who can pay for the latest novel and who has access to either the people or the resources to understand how to use these tools well.
So yeah, so one of the reasons I left Google and started my company was before I led product, I led the consulting arm, and in there we went out to Bentonville in Arkansas for Walmart for millions of dollars and years at a time to build out quite sophisticated systems for them. And now we have the opportunity to take those best practices of how to do data analysis, optimize your supply chain, optimize whatever, like anything with optimize, right? Like that's in essence what we do. But we can bring it to a company for a fraction, a tiny, tiny fraction of what a couple of years ago, a large multinational paid consultants millions of dollars for. So yes, access, absolutely, but now it's a fraction of the cost of what it used to cost. So I can get a very average company, a top-notch data analytics team, and it costs very little, right? And that gets me quite excited because there's so many people out there that just can't afford to have the sophistication that Amazon and Walmart are deploying when they make decisions, data-driven decisions. And now I can bring it to a very average company.
It is, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think so much is dependent upon who you're considering as your user, right? Like whether that's, yeah, I think, because there's the people who won't have anything but have this, which may be better than nothing. And then there's people who have I think a lot of times we all have an unspoken model in our head about the specific AI we're talking about and the context of the users. And it's good to say those explicitly.
Yeah.
I mean, I really recommend folks who are interested in this stuff, like to switch from like the subscription model to the API model where you're paying for use. Because, I just ran a thing the other day where I asked it to draft a program that actually to rebuild a software package that I had spent several $1,000s building a first draft of. And it cost 50 cents. You could see the one-to-one comparison there. It was pretty shocking, and I've still got some work to do, but like not thousands of dollars worth of work. And it's amazing. And I think that does, as you say, it puts incredible pressure on people to adopt. And that's why I think it's so important to ask ourselves, what are the options that are being presented to us today? And what are the options that we could have presented to us that maybe aren't being presented to us? So for instance, you talk about like the open, I would call them more like open access or downloadable and tweakable, not open source, but the open-ish models. Those present some really interesting options. Like now there's the affordance, I can download it on my laptop and, discuss a paper without having to send it to a cloud company. But that's like extra work, and that's a thing that you have to like be a bit of a geek to know how to do. And then there are other things that are not even possible. Like for instance, say a high road public option that has really, really clear data stewardship practices where I know, my data is going to be protected in a certain way. For instance, I was asking on social media the other day, is there a platform where I can subscribe to one of these openish models being provided on a cloud service that's entirely on green energy. No such option is available. Like, that's a very reasonable kind of possible model to have, but it's just important to notice, especially as we feel this pressure that you have to use this stuff. What are the ways in which this could be done differently that we might want to have, especially when people are feeling that pressure to dive into this sector headlong, and we may not be making the best choices about protecting ourselves in this context.
On the flip side of going more cautious and protecting ourselves, when we think about that, I want to differentiate between literally protecting ourselves, right? And actually, is this the best thing for the greater good, right? Like, so for some reason, a bunch of my friends are doctors, and we had a dinner, and they said, yeah, I could see AI helping me like with MRI images and a couple things as a doctor, but doctors will be doctors for a long time. And I agree in some extent to that, but they were really pushing back on AI being used more aggressively in the medical field. So then on the other side of the table, we had a conversation on helping malnutrition children in developing countries, and there are you have to have a doctor prescribe these protein bars, like you can't just give it out. But there's no doctor who wants to work there. And so we were wondering if we could use AI to diagnose malnutrition in children. And all the doctors were like, yes, of course. And I was like, well, that was a big switch from, you talking about your personal Boulder Community Hospital job, And so I think if we discussed it in those terms, like, okay, for my personal job security, this is what I believe, but for the greater good of humanity, right, in developing countries, yes, let's do X, Y, and Z, because it's actually quite good.
So I've heard about research where essentially whoever you ask about the AI to do their job says, yeah, it could help, but no one can replace what I do.
Just to be clear, I'm not advocating a kind of overly cautionary position here. What I'm actually proposing is, how else could we be advancing these tools? What other lines of means of financing, what other kinds of business structures could we be advancing these technologies in? I think the kind of pause and reluctance, while it has a certain importance, is in some respects a losing game. To me, the question is, how else could we be enabling this stuff to happen?
Yeah, so let me pause for a moment and sum up some of the themes here, because I think it's been terrific. My favorite theme so far has been this pun or even analog with computer autonomy and human and societal autonomy. So it has this double meaning, of course, where autonomy and agency is all about self-direction and the ability to make your own choices as a human or society. And what I'm hearing Nathan and Elana and Lucas raise are these parallels. First of all, societal autonomy. Can't society decide which way AI plays out, maybe more creatively, rather than just letting it by default, the current business models? I like that. Elana has suggested this autonomy, which is the ability to opt out of AI systems if you want, and the degree to which there will be downward pressure. So I really like this parallel thinking, and I think it sort of sheds light. And another topic I've heard in here, which is really interesting, are kind of the paradoxes of AI. On the one hand, it makes human experts available to many more people than they had before. So there's a sort of upskilling. Anyone who has access to AI, like ChatGPT, which is many of us, now has an expert in many fields who is only likely to get smarter that we never had. Maybe right now you have access to a mediocre lawyer, which is, ChatGPT is a mediocre lawyer, but if your alternative is no lawyer, then it's better. Same thing if ChatGPT is a mediocre doctor, if your alternative. On the other hand, not everybody has access to ChatGPT either in the United States or in the world. And we've seen the concentration of wealth due to technology. So a very constant thing with the internet is that it's, the rich get richer when they have tools, technological tools. So we have to be very conscious and deliberate to make sure that this divide doesn't continue, even though the people that have access to it may have better access to expertise that they didn't otherwise have available. So it's kind of a complicated dynamic there. So following up on that theme, let's talk a little bit about employment. My friend Professor Dave Levine over there and I are writing an article about the impacts of AI on the legal employment market, but I just wonder, what are your thoughts on some of this autonomy? So, I mean, maybe you, let me start with Lucas actually, because I'm interested that maybe in the past, the company would have paid 50 analysts to do the kind of work that your AI agents can do in minutes. Is that accurate or?
Well, yeah, I mean, so analysts are usually a cost center for most organizations. So most organizations don't have enough analysts, and there's a bunch of bandwidth problems. And then most analysts they want to advance their career quite quickly and be either on the more engineering side or more on the business side. So what our tool does, the way we position, and I think it's the right way to do it, is like, let us do a lot of the heavy lifting of running multiple permutations of the analysis, and then you take it in the morning and you can bring it to the stakeholder meeting, or you can give architecture recommendations to your engineering team. So really more of a tool to get you promoted as an analyst. I want to be very cautious with talking about replacing people. There are certain aspects it can do much faster, of course, right? Because, I mean, one of the biggest things, okay, slight little story. So in the beginning of our technology, we played the game, Lucas versus Orion. Orion is our tool. I'm a very good data analyst, right? I did this for many, many years before I went down the tech route. And so we wanted to see if Orion can perform at the same level as I can. We stopped doing this now because there's just no way I can keep up. Like the speed and just the thoroughness it has. Like I look at a new company's data set and it's just, oh my God, this is a mess. Like, why would you guys do it this way, right? This is just like, so, like I have to drink a lot of coffee and eat a lot of cookies to keep going, right? And Orion doesn't. Like, it's so excited every single time, right? And so I think just from that perspective, it's a very good tool, right? Where I would not be that diligent because I would find something, I push it out, I wouldn't look any deeper, right? Another thing we have often with a human analyst is that we have a tendency to look for the red number, the thing that's wrong, and we ignore everything that's green. But there's actually a lot of interesting things Orion finds when it dives deep on what is going well in the company. And that's a really interesting thing. I didn't quite realize how powerful that is. It doesn't have that bias for red.
Yeah, so I love a couple of themes I want to highlight in there. For one, our default mindset is all about AI and technology substituting. But as Dave and I have found in the economic research, it's a lot about augmenting and complementing, making humans better and more efficient. So we shouldn't necessarily believe our first instinct. And I don't know if you've seen, there's been a couple, you were talking about how when you see a messy data set and you bang your head against the wall, there's been some examples of AI systems like OpenAI's operator that are clicking on links and the links are dead, and then you see its thoughts. It says, "I'm getting frustrated here." So, and it's really hilarious. But what it's doing, it's a giant simulation machine. So it's simulating what it's seen in its training data of humans outputting frustration, and but it seems very human-like when it seems like it's getting mad when in fact it actually is not. Nathan or Elana, did you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I just thought back to our conversation about coming up as reporters in New York and like how important relationships are, and also how difficult that is to teach today, right? I mean, we're in a kind of doom loop, I think, where sometimes students seem to have a perception that all we need is the AI, and you forget the thing that might actually be becoming more and more and more important, which is the ability to develop relationships with other human beings as a way of having, as a way of reforming the world in certain respects. And so I think that's a real challenge we have as educators right now, is to on the one hand teach folks how to use these tools, but also recognize that you cannot use this as a substitute for a relationship.
Elana?
Yeah, two things. Also, one is I do worry about de-skilling to some extent, and that, you know, I teach law students, many of whom are type A nervous people. Some people in the room may empathize, sympathize, recognize. And I don't let my first-year students use AI, first semester, first-year students. And I would like to let them to use it for some things, but I know that in many cases, they're so nervous and don't want to look bad, that they would go there first, that they would really do that first, brief that case, see whatever, and then do the other stuff. And I want them to be able to develop skills to do the reading and the critical thinking skills about legal analysis first before they get the help. But the other thing I think is interesting about this, and I've been thinking about this, because there's a lot of conversation now, of course, and I'm sure anyone here has been attuned to it, teaching people how to prompt, right? And very important. But first of all, AI can help with that. Second of all, what I actually think is that a lot of my students are very good at executing tasks. Maybe they're AI agents in disguise. But you know, they're good at executing tasks. You can give them a task, they'll do it. But they don't always think beyond that. Like they don't always think about the audience and the person they're delivering the information to and what their wants and needs are. And, you know, for example, I say, I will send your query about your paper to someone I know who's a colleague who specializes in that, who I don't specialize in. And I say, but what you should do is write it in a way so that literally all I have to do is say, hi, how are you doing? My student has a question for you, right? Because if it's going to take me 15 minutes to parse through it and rewrite it and make it in a way that I would want it to be sent to me, it's different. But they're like, oh, you know, it's just interesting. So one thing that I think I'm a little concerned about is that the focus on tasks, very specific tasks, may lose sight of the larger scope of things, including sort of the personal relationship aspects of it, and also the tacit things you learn just by being around other people and seeing them do it.
Yeah, this is a great point. So one thing that I hear you saying that I want to highlight, and something I've emphasized to my students, what is a good way to use AI in education from the student's perspective? And again, we come back to this substitute versus complement. One of the reasons the main reason students go to university or school is to learn and to train your mind to think and through various skills. And anytime you're using AI, you should be thinking, am I substituting for learning? Is the AI doing what my learning for me, or am I complementing? So a good example of substituting for learning, we do a lot of case reading. And if you're asking the AI to read the case for you, that's not good, because you're substituting for training your mind for the process and the struggle of learning. However, once you've read the case, a good complement is to feed it in there and ask it clarifying questions. Then you're enhancing your learning. These are questions that you might not be able to ask your professor. And I think that's a really important way to handle de-skilling.
My favorite moment last semester was when I did not have any rules about AI usage, but the students were all seeing each other's assignments. And about halfway through the semester, they just kind of started saying in a certain class period, maybe we should have a rule against all the AI slop, you know? Finally seeing what I have been subjected to over the last few years made them realize, oh, this is actually not that cool. And I think there are two possible responses to that problem. One is like, okay, how could we use this tool better? You know, how could we improve our prompts and avoid this kind of repetitive nonsense? And their response was actually just an abolitionist posture, which was, okay, let's just like take a break from this stuff. But I think it really is important for people to recognize the way in which the shortcuts still, you know, at first it wasn't so easy, but within a few months, like you start to see the shortcuts as shortcuts. You know, humans catch up, we figure out what it looks like, and I think that process is just going to be a kind of ongoing sequence of norm building.
So I have kids in school, and my oldest, she has there's one teacher who said, okay, no AI, we're going to ban AI, you can't use it. And then a different one who actually came to class with 3 essays written by ChatGPT and said, okay, you guys you have to write this essay about this book. here are 3 that ChatGPT wrote, and I want to make sure yours are better than that. So use it as a foundation, read them, and then write yours. And I felt like I was more on the side of that teacher because I feel like it prepares my kids more for a future that they are going to be facing versus just, like don't use it. Yeah, but it's interesting. How do you include it? I mean, I also think it was good for the students to see what ChatGPT can do, and then having to pass it as a bar.
Yeah.
Okay, let's increase our bar a bit.
Yeah, those are very creative uses. And I'm of the mind of you that this technology is not going away. So education should not stick their finger in the dam and pretend it's not happening. Rather, we need to do research to figure out how do we leverage this to enhance learning. And there's a lot of ways in which this technology can really enhance learning, but we need to study this and be careful about it.
And I think use our collective power.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I was really appreciative through a committee I'm on at the university here is that the university is starting to develop an internal interface for LLM access. So a tool that would enable students and faculty to access multiple LLMs through the university's data policies. And I get really concerned, I've never in any of my classes required students to sign up for a commercial service of any kind. I think that is unethical and contrary to our mission. They can use them if they want, but I'm never going to require it. And this idea, so I don't tell them, okay, you have to use, say, ChatGPT. And I really want a better option where I can say, okay, I recommend you use the university system because it has this data, these kinds of data protection practices built in. We don't have that yet. But I think it's really important for institutions like ours that have collective power to be asking those questions of what does it look like to do this on our terms? And what kinds of demands do we make? And those demands get heard. I mean, the research project I mentioned earlier started out because of conversations I was having with a colleague at Microsoft who was talking about how Microsoft was changing the way it was deploying Copilot internationally due to the demands of co-determined workplaces in Europe. That collective power is already shaping the way these systems are being deployed. And that's a process that we as educational institutions and many other kinds of institutions, especially those concerned with the common good, can be part of.
Well, I think that's really, like you made a really important point there on the commercial license, right? Which like a lot of organizations asking, what shall we do to get started with AI? I think like making something accessible to your employees or your students that fulfills the requirements of your data's not being used for training data, right? We just talked about this earlier. Because otherwise they might just go and sign up for free license where they don't quite even realize that the data might be used. And then they're putting in information that might be confidential about your organization, right? So by providing your employees or students or whoever in your organization with a way to access AI that is not going to share your data, right? I think that's a really important first step just to make that accessible to them.
Yeah, this is a great point. And one thing it's important to emphasize to the audience that different AI systems offer different levels of security and privacy guarantees. Often the free ones offer none. Or at least they don't promise they won't train on it, even if they don't. Some of the other websites, in other countries, if you use DeepSeek, you have no idea what might happen with it. Whereas as you start to get to the commercial systems, depending on their terms of service, they sometimes offer you medium security and privacy guarantees, and then you can actually pay for high security systems that are what are known as SOC 2 compliant, where they give you all the highest security privacy standard guarantees. But those are often expensive and for businesses. But it requires a lot of knowledge and literacy about the different capabilities of these systems that certainly students and maybe members of the public might not have. So on an optimistic note, I want to think, what are some of the benefits? We've focused a lot on risk. Where do we see autonomous systems or things with more agency and autonomy from a technical perspective really bringing benefits to society?
I mean, I mentioned the doctors in developing countries, right? I think in general, it is, for example, it's much easier to get internet and a cell phone to developing countries than it is to get doctors to live there. So I think there is similar to how we have seen mobile usage in Africa be much faster adopted than other technologies in the past, right? I could see AI being adopted quite quickly. Just so you have like a mediocre lawyer, right? a decent doctor and those kind of things. And hopefully the level of misinformation then also gets reduced versus searching on Google, which was the previous way people got medical advice. And I think there is a higher threshold with LLMs now. I am very excited for our society's future in entrepreneurship, because it has been very hard in the past to start your own company. You needed to have expertise in law, in accounting, in marketing, all these different things in order to really pursue your passion of what you wanted to be as an entrepreneur. Now the bar to start a company and to run a company is much, much lower than it was before. So I talked to the Small Business Council in Longmont, right? Like for someone to open a storefront and run a business, it's now quite affordable and realistic to start that. And so I hope we have a future of a lot of entrepreneurs that run tiny businesses, and yeah.
That's great. Elana?
Yeah, I'm excited because I do think that it will provide ways for people to reduce some of the monotony, some sort of detailed tasks, and also, yeah, allow people to be more creative in ways they couldn't before. Now you don't need to know to code as much, if at all, if you want to do something simple, right? You can create a really interesting visual image and do that. And you can also, I think, just explore things in a way that are less isolated as like Google results and learn more. And I think that's actually really powerful.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the autonomous systems we haven't really talked about are systems like Claude and ChatGPT that can create programs for you kind of semi-autonomously, little web apps that can do all sorts of things for you that you might not otherwise be able to do, can save data entry. So everyone, all of us are now professional programmers because you can give it a goal and it'll go out and do not a great, but a pretty good job for some basic things.
Better than me,
Yeah.
I want to really emphasize the creative part. The two key moments for me in overcoming my like resistance to some of this technology has been sitting with artist friends and playing with it, and being drawn in by the kinds of things that they were doing and that we were doing together. One was very early on when ChatGPT first came out, and we were playing with an app that used it and working on a zine that we were building in my lab. And it was just like a very, very weird project. And the AI just let us make it weirder. And the second was this last summer, I spent a weekend with a friend who's working on these metallic self-reproducing computerized plants that she's been working on for years, and trying to teach them how to talk using a local LLM, and just starting to experience what's out there with these open-ish models that allow you that you can download, run locally, tweak, play with, mess around with, make weird in a way that the corporate models that you see, like, or the productized models, I should say, that you see don't get weird. And it's that weirdness that I think is kind of the beauty in this stuff, is that it's a kind of funhouse mirror on ourselves and our society, and particularly our digital society, our documented society. And it's that ability to understand something deeper about what it means to be alive that those are the glimpses that made me actually willing to like dive into this stuff much more deeply.
Elana?
I also think there's an access to justice issue here. So on one hand, I am slightly worried about the lowest tier lawyer jobs going away. But it also means that people who would normally, Google around or maybe represent them, it makes it more possible for people to represent themselves, which I don't recommend, okay? But, some is better than none. But also, lawyers are expensive. And there are some things that are relatively simple and straightforward. And having the ability to get that through a machine, which is not going to cost, someone told me the average starting billables for my students is $350 an hour, right? Like, that's a lot of money to do something relatively minor, write a will, whatever it is. So I think that is also really exciting.
Yeah, no, I love this idea about AI generally for access to justice. For high stakes issues, we still recommend go to a lawyer, but we always have to consider your next best option. And a lot of people's next best option is not a lawyer because they simply can't afford one. So their next best option is Google or a friend or a community member. And that's not a great option when expertise is needed. So ChatGPT can do a pretty good job when your next best option is Google or a friend. So there's a lot of kind of opportunities for upskilling in certain domains.
And a bit more ability to be vulnerable, actually. So there is, not that I've seen it much, but I've heard people say like they have a question like, hey, I'm struggling with my teenager right now, XYZ is happening. Who would you have asked before, right? I mean, maybe you're vulnerable enough to go to your parents who are now, but not everybody is. And so there are a lot of questions I think we have sometimes on our mind where we want to run it by someone. And I know it sounds silly, but like an AI won't judge you. You can actually be vulnerable and ask the question.
But privacy really matters.
Yeah.
So I've actually heard that about youth, that sort of, so people who are, entering puberty and in those very awkward years are often using it a lot right now. There's some interesting studies showing that, those awkward questions there.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a great point because a lot of people are using it as a therapist. Again, we still recommend going to trained therapists, but again, your next best option may be nothing because there's a shortage of therapists, you can't afford therapists so ChatGPT might be better than nothing if your alternative is nothing.
We have to be really careful though with how we are vulnerable to these things.
Yes, that is true. They leave us be
so
manipulated and. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one example of this, why the stakes are really high for making sure that we have good options, we have high road options, we have trustworthy options.
Well, this is my perfect segue to our final question before we open up the audience. Nathan, you've talked a lot about good design, being intentional in our design. Can you share any design principles that you've thought about ways to make sure we get beneficial autonomous systems that are good for all? And what are some of the research directions we might do and activities we as the public might do to create the future we want to see?
Great, yeah, I think one piece is keeping the conversation going. I mean, insisting that it's a false choice between like progress and ethics. If the progress goes ahead and blows up in our faces, we're going to lose that progress and the public is going to turn on it. We need to be doing both at once, and this current political moment, I think, which is trying to choose one over the other, I think is a precarious position to be in. Second, I think we need to be investing in high road options. We need to ensure that there's capacity to either compel private companies to create high road options, to support the development of financing models that enable trustworthy, accountable systems that are accountable to the people who rely on them, who are vulnerable to them. And that's something we've done in other industries in the past, but is not really available in the tech industry. And I think also be very attentive to these questions around competition. You talked about competition as a really vital protection from your perspective on business. I think we need to be attentive to the need for interoperability expectations, for instance. How do we, being attentive to antitrust concerns that might be coming up, market power concerns that might be coming up. I think the kind of health of the ecosystem that we're seeing right now is largely because it's a very competitive phase, but that might not naturally stick with us. And so I think being really attentive to that is going to be essential.
And there is like one of our design principles, I talk about the checks and balances and the agent that checks the other agent's work, right? They don't actually know that they're AI, right? They think they're interacting with other, I mean, we don't really explicitly state this, but not every tech company out there is doing that right now. It's quite rare actually that you have this checks and balances. But you know, I'm signing commercial contracts. I'm on the hook for being accurate. So I build it that way that it has these checks and balances. Because it's quite interesting having AI police other AI. It works quite well.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of checks and balances. I mean, that has proved resilient in lots of systems, so why not make that a design principle? And I also like your idea, Nathan, of keeping the conversation going and not giving into the narrative that technological determinism, we are the humans that can create our own society. It doesn't have to be created for us passively.
Mine, I have a small one, but
Yes.
I think it could, I don't know if it's possible, but I think it would be best if the companies didn't anthropomorphize AI. You know, having it say, "You're the smartest." "Oh, I'm sorry, I messed that up." That creates weird psychology. You know, I studied these for a living, and I started writing please before my prompts. Now, apparently that gets you better results. Yeah. But I realized that even though I knew really well that it wasn't thinking and there wasn't a human or a being there, at least the way I conceive of them, you know, because it was talking to me in human language with human type emotions, that's how I was responding to it. And I think that that can create some odd psychological relationships.
On the flip side though, like some people were saying, like because so much of our workforce is now just chatting with each other really quick, you don't want to confuse your human coworker with another AI, right? Where you're just like, do this.
Oh no.
So it's like,
say please no matter what, right? But yeah, just, you know, I think that giving it a sort of a personality and a persona. I mean, we've seen Her, we've seen that movie. You know, there's some scary stories coming out now about people becoming overly attached to their chatbots. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's some costs and benefits to that. It's something we should think, especially in terms of the vulnerability. You could imagine a future where your AI chatbot, you know, becomes your friend and then tries to sell you something, taking advantage of the relationship. That it's not too distant a future to imagine. All right, let us open it up for the audience. Questions for the last couple of minutes. And our tradition is to start with a student. So if there is a student in the room, we'd love to answer your question first. Okay, over here we have a student, please.
Hi, folks. Thanks so much for your talk. This was really interesting. I'm a student here getting my master's in information and data science. So two things that AI has been really helpful with. But how would you guys advise me going into the workforce now, post-graduation, balancing, mastering these fundamental skills that I've learned here while also incorporating this new technology?
I mean, one idea goes back to this substitute complement. So if you're using it to just analyze your data and you're just letting it run off, that in school, that's probably not the best use of your learning time, because you want to be teaching yourself to do it at least first, make sure you've mastered those skills before handing it off to the AI system. So making sure you're not substituting for your learning is a really important skill, because that will help you have the fundamental skills out in the real world.
I think that unless you go to business for yourself, most places you work for will have, at this point, if they're of any size, will have their own AI principles and training, and will probably try to get you up to speed to how they want things to be done. But I would also just say that, yeah, balance out whatever you do with technology with, you know, human contact and as well.
yeah, I mean, to what Nathan was saying earlier, like, I think that's so important, and, you know, like, we can't understate that. I think one of the, like, we hired 3 students here from the master's program in the last few months, and one of the, some professors are very forward-looking, you know, and use new technologies, and some do not. And so it's a bit of getting people up to speed, and so if you have, you know, have your own projects on the side, I think that's always really great to see. participating in there's some competitions you can do, those kind of things, right, where we can really validate this person is up to speed on the newest technologies.
And I think it raises the question of like the class system that's always been built in our education systems, right? For instance, like, you know, Ivy League schools generally don't have like accounting majors, right? They have economics majors, right? You know, there's this expectation that if you're training the managerial class, you want them to learn higher level thinking. You want them to learn philosophy and you know, macroeconomics and you want them to learn to think in terms of big ideas, not rote tasks. And you know, I think there is a profound danger in these technologies about deepening these bifurcations. But I think there's also an opportunity in these technologies to help us, give us the chance to focus our attention on, okay, what are the higher level questions? You know, I've actually been really grateful in the context of this, that when I was a brief computer science major, I didn't take the like rote tasks route. I took the like use theoretical useless computer languages, but really understand data structures and really understand, you know, fundamentals, because I'm able to explain to these systems what I want at a high level. I don't remember the syntax at all, right? But I don't need to anymore. So I think it is an opportunity for us to really focus on, okay, what are the big picture questions that we get to now immerse ourselves in and master and deepen for ourselves? In a sense, like it's an invitation for more people to educate themselves for a kind of managerial life, for better or worse.
Yeah, I love that idea. And that's also been a theme of this, our hope that it could free us from monotony to maybe shift our resources as something we find more enjoyable or more valuable for us or society. Let us, right there, yep.
Hi, David Sullivan. So we are in the midst of a massive, quite possibly very illegal effort right now to replace most of the expertise, human expertise in the US government with AI. And so I was just curious, maybe really thinking about some of the points that Nathan raised, what are things that people who are now being moved out of those roles in government, how can they use AI to help build an alternative to what we are seeing take place right now?
Yeah.
I don't know. That is a tough question. I mean, I don't think, you know, for better or for worse, we have not figured out how to use AI effectively in politics, you know, and maybe that's good for the moment. There were concerns that there would be widespread AI misinformation with elections. We haven't seen a little bit, but not widespread and not influential, you know.
But again, I think it goes back to, you know, kind of what I was saying earlier, which is that sense of, you know, what's missing in certain respects right now in politics is a kind of variety of visions. You know, I think vision is like the thing most needed, and you know, that's something that we need to do. We need to be the agents, you know, of that. I also just think it is an interesting moment for the concept of duty. You know, I was raised by two people who met in a federal agency, and, you know, I'm a child of the bureaucracy. So I have a certain deep respect for, like, riding the metro in you know, Washington, D.C. and seeing all these, like, kind of sad bureaucrats, like, going to their jobs. And there's just, I associate that with a sense of duty and service. You know, I really, like, respect those faces, you know, and I think it does raise that question about, like, what, you know, do we have to reconceptualize, do we have to tell new stories about what duty and service look like in a world where maybe these rote tasks aren't necessary, or maybe where we start to discover, as a lot of the rehirings are suggesting, that maybe actually we have not done away with the need for those kinds of people and work.
I think in some of these cases where people, like, are trying to replace workers completely with AIs, there's a lack of understanding between, but there's expertise, there's knowledge, and then there's what I call know-how, and networks. And there's probably a more formal way to say know-how that media studies people know. But it's, especially in a place like politics, things that happen in DC, I have friends who are super plugged into DC. There's always a back channel conversation going on somewhere. Everyone knows that this person's gonna do this thing and they introduce this thing, or if you give them this thing, like there's a lot of context that I don't think you can get into a machine at this stage. And so I think, I once had when I worked at a law firm, I had someone who was working under me. She was very good. And she started writing questions for a deposition. And the questions were like, what is rule X? How do you follow rule X? And for the lawyers in the room, I was like, no, you never mention rule X. You just say, what do? You don't remind them of all the things they're supposed to do before they answer that question. And it's one of those things where that's not logic, it's strategy, but it's a very human strategy. So could you program that in? Sure. But yeah, I think that it's easy to confuse those two, or to think that one can completely replace the other.
Right. And then as David and I have come across, there is this simplistic illusion that technology fully replaces humans, and it almost never works like that.
You'd probably want to test it somewhere other than the federal government
Right.
first.
That is right. Right up front here, please wait for the microphone.
Hi. I was wondering if you could tell us if you know whether the training on the platforms that exist right now, do they look across everything that's written, and including opinions and journalism, and differentiate, for instance, within different journals among how well researched and how seriously those journals are taken? And furthermore, and maybe more importantly, do they read the scientific literature, and is there any possible way of introducing a balance of what we expect the truth is, and is scientific peer-reviewed literature given more weight than people's opinions or blogs or whatever?
I mean, I really recommend reading the New York Times complaint against OpenAI and Microsoft as a signal of this. It suggests evidence, at least, of just how important repositories like the New York Times for being, relatively reliable journalism is for these platforms. Also, you can think not just in terms of journalism or peer-reviewed science, but also things like Stack Overflow, which is a tool that lots of software developers and others use to find solutions to problems. And it's found a way to enable like the most reliable, trustworthy solutions to rise to the top. Those are incredibly valuable for training these systems. And so it does, just the behavior of the people compiling data sets for these foundational models, the way in which they are really looking out for what are the places where we have found often socio-technical systems for creating trustworthy information. In a moment where we're looking for what to train these systems on, those processes of peer review, of fact-checking, of reputational rank become really, really precious. And again, that's something that I think it calls us to explore more deeply. How do we create systems that really help us bring truthful things to the top, because these systems need those signals?
And I'll say it's changed over time. So in the early days, say 2022, the tendency was just to take everything on the web and put it in, and then sort of just let aggregate voting, meaning if you know that the sun doesn't revolve around the Earth because enough people have said that the Earth rotates around the sun. But now, in the last couple of years, they've realized the importance of data quality. So the sets they train it are much more highly curated. They filter out low quality sources. They deliberately include high sources. And now a lot of the answers that you get from the frontier systems go out, before they answer, they go out to the most trusted sources, as you say, provide context that are likely to increase the reliability of the answer. So there have been improvements in that regard. And then I think we have time for one more question. One more. Okay, right here, yes.
It kind of relates to the New York Times question. Lucas, I think you said that if you no longer had access to OpenAI, you've captured that information, you're good to go. Is that?
No, we don't capture that information. We're
I don't
able
mean
to switch
capture,
it out.
you've learned from it.
No, we're not
No.
learning actively from
Okay.
them. We're using just a different LLM. So Meta's Llama, for example, or Google's Gemini. So there's like some people are worried that they have too much power, like OpenAI would have too much power or Meta. And what I'm saying to that is like we can actually just swap them out.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not actively learning from those
Okay.
systems.
But as it relates to the New York Times case, isn't that information been incorporated and it's already out there? So whatever gets decided by, I think, the Supreme Court, is that kind of irrelevant because it's been captured? And are we not facing that sort of wheel on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, and it's so to look at the architecture of a neural network, like the architecture of a large language model, right? You're looking at about 500 billion variables, right? So there's each variable has a weight attached to it in multiple directions for probability. And so is the information in there? Yes, in some shape or form, much like it's in your brain. So if I do a brain scan, right, your neurons in your brain are connected in a certain way, but is it a true representation of the article? No, but it's a memory of the learnings you had from the article that is still in there. So when you ask an LLM, for example, to recite your favorite poem, it is not necessarily able to do so, but it can write the poem in very similar meaning and very similar tone to your favorite poem, if that explains it. So is it in there? Kind of. Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking our excellent panel.